TJ Watt is definitely the best player on the Steelers roster and especially the Steelers defense, but Minkah Fitzpatrick is going to play a pivotal role in how the Steelers develop moving forward and how Teryl Austin and Mike Tomlin design this defense in the era that's post Keith Butler. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. We're going to talk about that importance and what the Steelers defense could be. And I say we because Josh Taylor of KDK TV is joining us here right on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're enjoying this video, please hit the like button on YouTube, hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. And remember, if you want to help us out any further, go on to Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment. We do both at the same time. We get you a shout out at the end of the show. Joining me today, as I said, our recurring guest, Josh Taylor of KDK TV here in Pittsburgh. Josh, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. It's good to be on again. It's weird because it seems like every time you want to have a conversation about something pops up related to what we're talking about, and it's like I got to stop talking to Carter because every time we talk about something, that thing comes close to happening. So maybe we should like leave some things alone. I don't know.
Are you kidding me? I want more things. It gives me more content. This is easier to produce. What are you saying here, Josh? Anyways,
I don't know. I'm starting to feel responsible for stuff that happens, and I'm like, oh man. So it's just weird how we talk about stuff, and the stuff that we discuss kind of comes to pass. It's kind of eerie.
It is. We were talking about, assistant coaches recently, and then they hired the assistant offensive line coach. But if you want to see that episode, I talked about that in depth for yesterday's episode. Go check out my breakdown of Pat Meyer, zone versus gap run schemes, and how that plays into the Steelers. But I want to talk to you because you and I have talked a lot about defense. That's going to be the essence of what the Steelers are in the coming years. And everyone's excited about TJ Watt, Cam Heyward, and the defensive front. They got to fix the run defense. Devin Bush, what's he going to do? And everyone knows Minkah Fitzpatrick's back there. But I truly think, Josh, a huge storyline for the Steelers that isn't being talked about enough in Steeler media lore and all that is the role that Minkah Fitzpatrick is going to play in Teryl Austin's defense. I wrote about this for DK Pittsburgh Sports. You can go check out my Carter's Classroom article on it where I break down film, stats, analysis on how this plays into it. But when you look at Minkah Fitzpatrick, and the importance that he has played in the Steelers' success in the past 3 years since he's been on the team, he's pivotal. When he is having success, when he is creating turnovers, the Steelers are winning games. In the 9 games that he's made interceptions, they are 7-2. There's no disputing that. And 2 losses are one time against the Niners when they created 5 turnovers in Mason Rudolph's first start and they still lost the game. And then was the blowout loss to the Bengals. If the Steelers offense was able to get anything going in that game, his interception might have changed the game in that situation. But Josh, Minkah to me it's all for Teryl Austin, who Minkah has said he loves. He didn't want to praise. He said, I don't want to even praise this man too hard because I don't want other teams to take him away from us. But between Teryl Austin and Mike Tomlin, however people feel about Mike Tomlin calling plays and Teryl Austin designing them and all that, to me, one of the biggest focuses of this Steelers defense has to be making sure that Minkah Fitzpatrick is back into a roaming role in the defense. And what I did with my film study, Josh, is when I looked back all throughout the year, and I said this during the year too, Minkah Fitzpatrick was not allowed to be what he was in 2019 and 2020. Why? Because the departures of Steven Nelson and Mike Hilton left the Steelers a little bit bare at the cornerback room. Joe Hayden missed games, so that means you had James Pierre starting out on the outside. You had Arthur Mollett starting on the inside. And that left the Steelers in situations where they said, Minkah, we can't let you be in your sort of prowling, robber role that you're really successful in creating turnovers on, because you have to specifically back up this person here and that person there so that we don't get beat. I wanted to ask you, when you look at Minkah, what do you see from him that allows him to be that game changer that quickly flips things around?
Let me start by what you see when he's not there.
Huh.
Let's go to that game against the Chargers, where the
boy.
Steelers defense came back time and time again in the second half and kept getting the ball back for that offense to get them back in the game. And then after the Steelers stopped the Chargers on fourth down on their own end of the field, get the offense the ball. The offense goes 3 and out and kicks a field goal and has a 3-point lead. Chargers get the ball back. They drive down the field for the game-winning touchdown pass. What happened on that play, though? Trey Norwood was at the safety position. Minkah Fitzpatrick was not there. Coverage gets blown. Boom, Chargers win that game. And my first initial response was, what happens if Minkah Fitzpatrick is on the field for that play? Does that play probably happen? And my answer is no. My answer is that no, that play probably does not happen. That's the first question I ask. Then I move into what happens when he's on the field. And you laid it out really, really well. I thought your story for DK Pittsburgh Sports, which I checked out quickly before we came in here. I thought that laid it out really, really well. And what I did was I jumped on to his Pro Football Reference page. And this is something that stuck out to me. And you mentioned how they're 7-2 when he gets an interception. And then something that stuck out to me was, what was his passer rating for opposing quarterbacks when he was on the field? In 2019, now granted, he was with two different teams. So combined, it's 93.
Right.
But only because it's 158.3 for the 2 games he was with the Dolphins. He was targeted 7 times. He gave up 7 catches and 3 touchdowns. He looked pretty bad, but he wasn't playing the same position with Miami that he was when he came to the Steelers. He shows up with the Steelers. He's targeted 25 times, gives up only 13 catches, and the opposing quarterback's rating was 46.3 in 2019.
Jeez.
After they brought him in an early season trade. He was that good that fast. Now, the year before that in Miami, when he was strictly playing the safety position, his opposing quarterback rating was 64.6. So he was still pretty effective. The problem was Miami kept moving him around and kept making him do different jobs. He comes to Pittsburgh and says, hey, Teryl Austin says, hey, you're going to be this roaming guy. You're going to play the deep ball. You're going to be the center fielder. You're going to make plays in open space. 2020, a little bit thing, probably a little bit more, 26 targets, 13 catches allowed. His opponent quarterback rating was 65.7. He gave up 1 more touchdown than he did the season before. Other than that, everything else was almost exactly identical. That's how much impact he had in just 2 seasons being added and having that role. I thought was really, really pivotal in why those 2 defenses were as good as they were. And they still, for some odd reason, still don't get credit for being as good as they were. I keep making these 2 cases. The 2019 defense, if that defense doesn't play the way they did, they don't go 8-8 in that season. The 2020 defense,
they might not go 4-12.
They might barely go 4-12. The 2020 team doesn't win the division without that defense. They just don't. It's just the way they played was at that kind of level. And I'm still making the case that this 2021 team doesn't go 9-8 without this defense. And Minkah Fitzpatrick didn't play nearly the same role he did in the 2 previous seasons. That says a lot to me as far as if he's able to do what he's best at. Because the thing you heard a lot in 2021 is, Minkah's not getting picks now. I'm like, yeah, he's not doing the same job.
Right.
Of course you're not going to have the same results when you're not doing the same job. Cam Heyward's been doing the same job the entire time. TJ Watt's been doing the same job. And if anything, he's in coverage less. So he's doing the same job more. There's a reason why their production has gotten better. And Minkah Fitzpatrick's has changed because he's not doing the same job that he did before that he was successful at, which makes me just as hopeful as you going into 2022 with Teryl Austin as the defensive coordinator and being able to, emphasize, hey, everybody has their job. Everybody do their job here. So this guy can do his job better than everybody. And maybe everybody benefits from it. And there's a twofold, there's a 2-edged sword to this because the 2019 defense really had 2 different things going for them. They led the league in turnovers. They led the league in sacks. But another 2 things that they had Minkah Fitzpatrick doing that job that he does so well. And they had a healthy Devin Bush who led them in tackles. And he had 6 takeaways of his own to match Minkah Fitzpatrick. There's a lot of things you mix in that this 2022 defense can look a lot better next season if things go right.
That's what I want to keep talking to you about is how do they get back to that point? Because that's the bottom line. You need takeaways. You need big play factors. You need to stop the run, but you need a guy in that deep part of your team that can fly around and be that game changer in the middle of the field. I'll talk about the importance of that with you in a minute here and the chances they have of making that happen again. But first, we're going to talk about betonline.net, one of our great sponsors here at the Locked On Steelers podcast. Football season might be over, but basketball is full steam ahead with both pro and college hoops available for betonline.net, where you can place down your bets. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, betonline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remembers the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right down to Olympic coverage and information at all times. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter here, your host with Josh Taylor of KDK TV. Josh, we're talking about Minkah Fitzpatrick and the importance of that. One thing that I think that's important to remember is that person who can be in the middle of the field, who can change everything, that role is so pivotal for great defenses. And even if you're not great, even if you're just good and opportunistic, all the best defenses need that. The Steelers of the 2000s into the early 2010s, they had Troy Polamalu. Even though he was a strong safety, that guy being the X factor who could weave in between all the things, that forced offenses to have to worry about him, to have to say, I have to know where he is at all times, and that makes things easier for other guys. But a big part of getting that guy the opportunity is having the right players in front of him or around him, so that he doesn't have to, what we said before, babysit other responsibilities. Because the problem is when you looked at the Steelers roster this year, you look at Arthur Maulet, you look at James Pierre, you look at the guys that they've had, Justin Lane, having to put him out there. If you were the Steelers, you were really worried. If he goes up against Jarvis Landry in the slot, of course that's Arthur Maulet. If you go up against Jamar Chase, you go up against Henry Ruggs. Those are situations where you're going to get burned by faster, those #1 receivers that are going to be placed all around the field. And Minkah's #1 job, on top of creating turnovers, is keeping the big play from happening. Like you said, against the Chargers, he wasn't there. And after the Steelers were able to come back and get the lead, they gave up that touchdown in one big play because of a miscommunication. Minkah is a master communicator. He puts everyone on the same page. Since he's been there, the Steelers have been much better at taking away the big play and taking away the deep ball. But you need the guys around him. And a phrase that you hear from a lot of football guys all around the place. Dale Lally says it at DK Pittsburgh Sports. Matt Williamson says it here in the Locked On Podcast Network. It's not always about the X's and O's, about the Jimmies and the Joes. And that is why, Josh, I think it's going to be imperative for the Steelers, as much as we're talking about improving the offensive line, they need to get players on this defense who can handle their roles, handle them well, and say, hey, we're locking down all these spots. Minkah, you go be that ranging free safety in the center of the field and be the game changer that you need to be. And that's what puts everything back together.
I'm glad you brought up good defenses that had that guy in the middle that was such a playmaker. And Troy Polamalu, it's really, it might not be giving him enough credit by saying he was a guy in the middle of the field, because he made plays all over the field. He made him in the middle of the field. He made him in the sidelines. He made him in the backfield.
But that's the point, that they're free to do all of that because everyone else is doing their jobs.
That's how special he was. It was fun hearing Ryan Clark talk about him doing his job as opposed to Troy doing his. Ryan Clark goes, I got the easiest job in the world. I just got to defend my little one part of the field, and then Troy does the rest. Like it was hilarious hearing him describe just how easy his job was, because all he had to do was his one little part, and Troy Polamalu handled everything else. Mm-hmm. But the guy that I think better encapsulates this particular discussion is Ed Reed.
Yes,
when you saw Baltimore's defenses in the early 2000s and going into the 2010s, that middle of the field, and this was the one thing Ed Reed was so special at. Quarterbacks couldn't even look Ed Reed off. Nope. Like there was a particular play where Peyton Manning tried to look off Ed Reed, and he still managed to get back across the field and still get to the ball. It was really uncanny how well he was able to read and make plays just off of seeing and reacting. And stuff like that is it's so rare. It's so special to see. Now, not that I'm comparing Ed Reed to Minkah Fitzpatrick, because that's not where I'm trying to go with this, but just stressing the importance of having that guy that can make plays is going to make your defense that much better. The thing that sticks out to me when you talk about Minkah Fitzpatrick, maybe trying to have the one role as opposed to trying to back everybody else up, I'm reminded of the exit interviews, and you were a part of all of these when the guys were done at the end of the season. And there were 3 guys whose exit interviews stuck out to me: Arthur Maulet, Trey Norwood, and Ahkello Witherspoon. All three guys said the same exact thing. Minkah was the one that helped me learn what I needed to do. Trey Norwood really praised Minkah. He's like, he helped me figure out my job as a safety and as a corner because he knew what I had to do as a safety, but he also knew where I needed to be as a corner because he's played both positions. So he just knows where everybody needs to be because he's that guy that has to be able to direct traffic. But you're talking about a slot corner and two other corners, and one slot corner plays safety, that all said the same thing. Hey, this guy helped me figure out what my job was. Then you have Terrell Edmonds, who says, look, this guy makes my job easier because I'm able to do this one thing, and then he's able to handle the other thing. So I know he's going to be back deep, so I can worry about what's going on in the middle. I can worry about what's going on with my responsibilities as far as coverage or being near the line of scrimmage because I know anything past me, Minkah's got it. So you're talking about four different guys who all played roles on this defense throughout the course of the season, all singing praises about how this guy helps them do their jobs better. And that's not counting Joe Hayden, who says, hey, this guy's the most talented guy on our defense, and he does so much stuff so well and helps everybody else out. So you're talking about the veteran guy in the secondary and all the younger/newer guys in Ahkello Witherspoon's case, because he is a veteran, but he comes in a trade and had to learn the defense in a short period of time. And he credited two people, Minkah Fitzpatrick and Teryl Austin.
Huh.
I don't
funny.
It's a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. So, and for the record, Ahkello Witherspoon is a guy that I hope is back next year because now that he's familiar with everything, now that he's played with these guys, and you can tell he's found the comfort level, he ended up leading the team in interceptions this season. Go figure.
Yep.
You want to have that kind of cohesion. You want to have that kind of group back that understands, hey, we all know where everybody else is now. We all know what this guy needs to do. We know what that guy needs to do. Our position coach is the DC now, so we know what he expects from us. That's the kind of cohesion, that kind of continuity, though. Here's that word again that we always talk about. When you could have that going into that unit next season, that got stronger as the season went on, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. That becomes a really important part to that defense getting back to what we saw a couple seasons ago.
It certainly does. And that communication is about, and I've done episodes where we've weighed, should it be Joe Hayden that they keep? Should it be Ahkello Witherspoon they keep? I've advocated Ahkello Witherspoon just makes a lot of sense. There's certainly a warning level there because you're like, hey, this was only a short sample size for half of a season. But he looked good. He wasn't just getting interceptions. He was contesting. He was looking. He had good technique. He was walling guys off. He was playing the ball well, and he was communicating at a high level. I still think even if they bring back Ahkello Witherspoon, they need to go get themselves another outside cornerback who can lock it down. And then you can bump Cameron Sutton to the inside, let him play slot again, where he's had a lot of success. And then you have three corners that you can start with and say, you guys lock things down. Maybe you bring back Terrell Edmonds at the safety position, and you're saying that this is the group. We trust these guys. Minkah knows all of them. And if you sign one of the top cornerbacks, maybe a Stephon Gilmore, maybe a J.C. Jackson. I know I'm just scraping like the very top of the barrel here, but if you go again, and again, the Steelers are going to have a lot of salary cap money this year. You go and get guys like that. That's going to allow them, hey, go live on your island over there. We trust Ahkello Witherspoon to lock things down here. We trust Cam Sutton to play really well in the middle of the field. You hope Devin Bush and maybe another linebacker that you sign or that you draft is going to handle their responsibilities, and that you hope the defensive line is either healthy enough or if you've got another person to replace to it if he's not back, to all that. And then all that lines yourself up to get Minkah Fitzpatrick being back to the X Factor guy that he was in 2019 and 2020, where if you look back at those numbers, the Steelers in those years, they were just getting interceptions on top of interceptions. That's 3-year stretch, even with the dip that they suffered in 2013 this past year, 2021, when they only intercepted 13 passes. I think they had 20 in 2019 and 18 in 2020 and 2020. You look at those numbers, that 3-year stretch, the next best year, the only year that's been better in the last, I think, 18 years was 2004 to 2006, which was when Dick LeBeau became defensive coordinator again, and you saw the surge of Troy Polamalu, the surge of Ike Taylor, having James Ferrier in the middle of the field, and how good that defense was at the end of the Bill Cowher era because of those guys added. But again, personnel is very important. I want to keep talking about Josh with that right here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll be back in just a minute here, continuing this conversation. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter here with Josh Taylor. Josh, again, looking at these numbers and comparing the eras, and again, I'm not doing this simply to say that these guys are exactly like each other, but and you look back since 2004 when Dick LeBeau was second, not first, when he came back to Pittsburgh to start off as the team's defensive coordinator for his second stint. When he took over, since then, there have been 4 defensive backs who have recorded a season with 4 interceptions or more. There's Troy Polamalu, who recorded 7 interceptions twice and 5 interceptions once during that time. There's Deshae Townsend, who recorded 4 interceptions once. There's Joe Hayden, who recorded 5 interceptions once. And then there's Minkah Fitzpatrick, who's recorded 5 and 4 interceptions in 2 years. There's also James Ferrier. He recorded 4 interceptions one time in 2004. That's ridiculous. But point being, half of those defensive backs that have done that have been under Teryl Austin, have been under his tutelage, and are about that. Joe Hayden, when he did that in 2019, that was at the end of his prime when I think we could say that, hey, Joe Hayden was the guy, and Joe Hayden's still a dude. He's still one of the dudes. He's still a legend in his time in the 2010s and what he added to the Steelers defense at the back end of the year. But you could see in 2021, he's not able to do the same things that he could say in 2017, 18, and 19 when he came back to the Steelers. The Steelers need Minkah to get back to this point. Because if he's doing this, it changes everything. You saw what he did, with his interception, his pick 6 against the Colts in 2019. You saw how in those moments he flips games around when he does that. To me, this is again why prioritizing Teryl Austin. A lot of people are going to make a lot of hay about, Mike Tomlin calls the plays. Teryl Austin doesn't actually do anything. First of all, we've already covered that several times in the show. The coordinators obviously put together the packages from talking to the position coaches on the defensive line, the linebackers, the inside linebackers, the outside linebackers, the defensive backs coaches. They put together those packages, and that puts together the game plan. And then in the game, yes, Mike Tomlin is going to be privy to call plays and to have that happen. But that still leaves an important role for Teryl Austin to fill. So for Teryl Austin, this is why I'm saying it's imperative for him to find a way, and part of this ties into Kevin Colbert in the front office, to make sure that you leave him there to do that. Because, Josh, you and I have talked about this in the past 3 years. The Steelers have won 29 times. And I had to adjust this number because we looked it up and we did the numbers crunching. But there have been 21 of those 29 wins that they've had in the last 3 seasons. The Steelers defense has held a team to 20 or less points and either tied or done better in the turnover battle against their opponents. That is ridiculous. That's about 75% of their wins are from the defense playing at an unbelievable level. And we account for these in those years. There wasn't, they've been hurt up. They've lost guys in opportune times. If you look back at the 2020 season, for example, a lot of those games. In fact, I wrote all these down in my notepad here. In 2020, they did this 6 times. All of them happened leading into that last Ravens game that was played the week of Thanksgiving or the week after Thanksgiving because of the whole weird COVID situation the Ravens were in. Once Bud Dupree was gone on top of Devin Bush, and then Joe Hayden missing time for COVID, it stopped happening. Why? Because the Steelers just had too many holes to fill on their defense. This is what they have to get back to doing, especially in the post-Ben Roethlisberger era.
It's worth noting, of those 21 games, let's just look at the ones in the 2021 season. I think 8 of those 9 wins 21 season.
8, yes. 8.
This
they
team
had 8. Yep.
This team isn't in the playoffs if this defense doesn't do what it does.
And again, this is a year when the rushing defense was the worst in the NFL. Despite all the other things that they had going against them. Devin Bush didn't return back to form. Stephon Tuitt never played in this season. Joe Hayden missed significant time. Arthur Maulet had to be your starting corner.
6 quarters of Tyson Alualu.
6 quarters of Tyson.
6 quarters.
So many things wrong. And yet this defense had 8 games where you limit your opponent to less than 3 touchdowns, and you either win or tie the turnover battle. People think that this defense is bad because of they stink in the playoffs. They let up a lot of points to Cleveland. They let up points to Kansas City, first of all, who didn't. They let up a lot of points to the Jaguars years ago. Meanwhile, people are comparing a 2017 defense that didn't have Ryan Shazier, that's secondary was complete, had Artie Burns, Mike Mitchell, and Sean Davis as its primary starters, and had holes all over, and a rookie TJ Watt. That defense is nowhere near what the Steelers defense over the last 3 years has been designed to be when it's healthy.
And this is worth noting because I keep hearing people saying, oh, Mike Tomlin's defense this and Mike Tomlin's defense that. Mike Tomlin's defense has overcome an offense that has gotten worse over those last 3 seasons. They've done all that stuff you've laid out, and the offense progressively got worse.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people really take that into account because 2019, you had 6 quarters of Ben Roethlisberger because he blew out his elbow and that was it. So that means the remaining 14 games of that season, they went 8-6 with Mason Rudolph and a guy who's about to start a duck call podcast as their starting quarterbacks for 14 games. That defense is the reason why that team went 8-6. You can spin it however you want to, but that team does not go 8-6 in 14 games without that defense. And that defense, by the way, was 5th in the league in yards, 5th in the league in scoring defense. And they led the league in turnovers and takeaways and in sacks. That 2019 defense did that. Then you have this 2021 team. Yes, with that really bad rushing defense without their 2 best run stoppers in Tua and Alualu, you're going to have some problems there. Your leading tackler that you had 3 years ago was not up to form because he's coming off an ACL injury. And you were still able to see this defense, by the way, still be top 5 in the red zone and 9th and 3rd down. How is that possible with that defense to still be 9th on 3rd down and still 5th in the red zone?
Yeah,
they were able to do a lot of that. They took a lot of drives where the other team should have been getting points and capitalizing and making things worse. And they were able to force teams to either have to punt or keeping them to field goals. There were a lot of times they held teams to 3 when they probably should have given them touchdowns because the offense put them in terrible positions, and they still managed to wiggle their way out of it, and it goes unnoticed. But I didn't miss it, and I'm sure you didn't miss it.
No, I did not.
It stands to reason that if there's a standard I'm looking at as far as, and people keep overusing the standard as a standard quote. People, like, you're trying to use it as a detrimental term, and I don't even think you know what it means half the time. But if there's a standard I'm looking at this defense in 2022, I'm looking directly at 2019. If this defense can be as good as that one was with just a reliable running game, it doesn't have to be the best in the league, just be reliable and competent quarterback play. This team could be a lot
game
better.
Managed taking what's there. Taking
what's there and being able to take advantage of little situations here and there. When the defense gets you a takeaway, get you a big sack and forces a punt, how about you get some points out of that drive? Exactly. If you get the ball on the plus side of the field because the defense gave it to you, how about you get some points out of it? That's why they beat Buffalo, because the defense made plays on the plus side of the field. The special teams blocked a punt. TJ Watt and Cam Heyward combined yet again to combine on the takeaway, just like they did to score their first 7 points at Kansas City. I love how we talk about how the defense gave up all these points on the back end, but we forget the fact that the defense gave them the lead because the offense failed.
They were the only thing that the Steelers had going for them in that game. But
they were the Steelers scoring in the first quarter of that game. In the first 20 minutes of the game, they had kept Kansas City quiet, they kept them scoreless, and they provided the only points in the first 20 minutes of the game.
I mean, that right there is bottom line. And to your point, and we're talking about the offense and how it struggled. A lot of the defense, a lot of the things that the people blame on the defense because they go look at the box score and they say, oh, they gave up this many points. It comes after the defense gets stop after stop after stop, and the offense doesn't capitalize in the right moments. We have only
look at the drive charts, folks. Don't just look at the box score. Look at the drive charts.
Look at the drive charts. Look at the missed opportunities. Look at how many times the Steelers had, either had an opportunity to tie or take the lead in the game, and they did, and the offense didn't take advantage of it on those possessions. And how eventually, when you kept putting the team back out there, they're going to figure out your defense. Because in today's NFL, you can only do so much as a defense before teams start to figure out what your disguises are, what your play calls are, and then, hey, we're going to operate this way and do that. That's just how the offenses are designed here. But in this era, in these last 3 years we're talking about, where the Steelers ranked 5th overall in points and yards in 2019, 3rd in overall in points and yards in 2020, and then took a step back in 2021. In that span of time, the only time when the Steelers' offense was decent was for about 10 games in 2020, because you go back and you look at those losses once the Steelers fell off, because everyone said, oh, the Steelers defense, it fell apart in the end of the year once they got injuries. But on top of that, they got no backup from their offense. If you look at all of their games leading up to when the Steelers start off 11-0, their first 10 games, they scored 26 or more points each and every time. That was that was a great feat, right? We were all excited. We were like, maybe Ben's back. Maybe he figured out his elbow. And then whatever happened after that Jaguars game in that long week where they had to kind of wait for the Ravens to be okay to maybe play, they score 19 points in that game and they win. But in their last several games where they finished 1-5, they scored 17 points against Washington, 15 points against the Bills, 17 points against the Bengals. The one game that they won, they scored 28 points against the Colts. They needed that to be able to clinch their division, and then 22 points against the Browns, but that was a Mason Rudolph start. But you look at those games, they're only 4 straight games of only scoring in the teens when you needed it, and that's showed in those instances when the defense needed the offense to come up. When Bud Dupree was out, Devin Bush was out, and they had a lot of other problems, the offense was non-existent. And then you saw for all this year, the offense was never a factor that people were like, man, we are terrified of the Steelers because of their offense. Even in that Browns game when they lost in the playoffs, and people say, well, they scored 37 points, right? They only scored it once they were down by 3 or more possessions. That's where I look at the problems for this Steelers team, is that if they're going to, they can get back to being an even better defense than they were last year and in 2020, and maybe even better than 2019, because I truly think if they take actual money and make this a salary cap based team that's based in defense, that 2019 team, as good as they were, they paid to keep Steven Nelson, but they stumbled onto Mike Hilton a few years before that, and that's what led to that. They drafted Devin Bush, and he was a part of that. They had a lot of things working out for him, but that team was still heavily based financially on offense, with Ben being your highest paid player and Marquise Pouncey and David DeCastro. If you take that money and you reallocate it, because now you don't have a big fancy quarterback that you're paying for on your salary cap, you can get a super duper corner in free agency. You can pay for more really good role players on defense to fill things out. You can put yourself right back where you were in 2019 and maybe even be better. And you can have a solid ground game, which in 2019 they really didn't have, and their fumbles and lack of running back production in those years was also costing them. Sorry, go ahead.
2019. I'm glad you brought this up, because you mentioned a bunch of games where they didn't score a lot of points. You brought up 2020. Let's go to the last 3 games of 2019. They scored exactly 10 points in each of those last 3 games.
Dang.
10 points, 10 points, 10 points, and lost all 3. Lost to Buffalo by a touchdown, lost to New York by a touchdown, lost to Baltimore by 18. And now if you want to talk about a game where things could have really gone their way, if they scored more than 10 points in that game where they lost to the Jets, they lost 16-10 on the road against the Jets. They score more than a touchdown extra. They win that game.
Yep.
You score 17 points. You scored 18, 19 points. You got a shot to win that game. You maybe finish 9-7. You got a shot in the playoff spot in 2019 with Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges as your quarterbacks. That's what that team could have done if they just scored better than 10 points and maybe had a shot to win those games. It really does come back around to, and you hear Mike Tomlin use this term all the time. For all the people that say Mike Tomlin says a whole bunch of nothing, that means you're not paying attention, because he uses the term complementary football a lot. He'll say, we didn't play complementary football. People, what does complementary football mean? It means when the defense is doing a great job of not letting the other team score, you need to score points to win games. That's part of what complementary football means. When your defense gets a turnover, you turn that turnover into points. That's what complementary football means. When you're shutting down an offense, when you're making the other offense go 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, your offense should not be mirroring the other team's offense going 3 and out consecutively. Do your defense a favor. When they get off the field, keep the other team on the field. That's complementary football, because your defense is doing its job, but it's not its job to score points for you. That's your offense's job. The literal purpose of offense is to attack. And if your offense does not attack and make your defense's job easier to keep the other team from attacking, well, guess what? You're not playing complementary football. And this team has had opportunities in the past 3 years despite the injuries that we talked about, despite the lack of a competent running game that we talked about, despite different problems at the quarterback position that we talked about, there have been more opportunities for this team to play complementary football, and they simply have failed at doing it. But if a couple things on this defense gets better, they change the way they did a couple years ago, you now have a chance where this team is in a place again where they can play more complementary football, albeit while probably having a little bit of an easier schedule because they didn't win the division this year. So that's another thing that helps this team as far as who they're facing and maybe making the job a little bit, if not a lot, just a little bit easier next season.
No, I agree with that. That's another factor here. We have to remember in this year where they finished 9-7-1 with the worst rushing defense, with a beat to hell offensive line, with Ben Roethlisberger playing at the worst part of his career, they faced the toughest schedule in the NFL and still found a way to get a winning record in that situation. And
in the game that they tied, the defense gave up 16 points.
Exactly. The defense gave up 16 points, and they had a lot of problems with that as well. But you look at the opponents next year. You see, of course, the divisional opponents, but you're going to get a shot at the Raiders again. You're going to get a shot at Mac Jones with the Patriots. You're going to get a shot at Zach Wilson with the Jets. Whatever the Saints are going to look like in the first year without Sean Payton. You get the Buccaneers, but we don't know how that team's going to look without Tom Brady. Maybe without Tom Brady. We don't know. You get to go on the road and play the Falcons. You do have to play the Bills on the road, but you get the Panthers, the Colts, the Dolphins, the Eagles. This is a team that, again, if you reform the offensive line, if you buff up the defense to make them an elite group again, which, again, they have the stars around it and they have potential for other guys to fill in as role players. You add some more stars there. You could piece that group together, build up that offensive line like we've been saying all throughout the early part of this offseason, to let Najee Harris be the major force of the offense, that you can have a kind of a game manager type of quarterback. You're in a position where all of a sudden you can beat a lot of those teams. And people who say, oh, well, you don't have Joe Burrow, you don't have Josh Allen, you don't have Patrick Mahomes. Well, neither did the Titans when they earned the 1 seed. Neither did the Niners when they were a field goal away from beating the eventual Super Bowl champion Los Angeles Rams. These are things that can be done. I'm not saying the Steelers are going to go compete and win the Super Bowl next year, but I am saying that if they do these things in the offseason, we have a lot of time to see what they do. They can be in a position to be sitting here next year and be thinking, wait a minute, I thought we were supposed to be 4-12 when Ben Roethlisberger left, and then you're going to be looking at it saying, oh, wait a minute, this team is competitive.
Well, they already did that. They went 8-6 after Ben Roethlisberger got hurt. So clearly the expectation hasn't been realistic. Chris, I don't know how many times I've said this. This is one thing I learned in college. I want to say it was my comm ethics class. The definition, the unofficial definition of cynicism is the result of unmet, unrealistic expectations.
Ooh, I like that.
This defense continues to actually exceed unrealistic expectations. If there's anything that hasn't been met, the unmet expectations, it's on the offensive side of the ball. If you want to be really, if you want to really keep it funky, that's kind of how that goes. Now, it's funny because I'm talking about unmet, unrealistic expectations. The expectations you and I have for next season's defense, they're actually realistic because we saw it happen 3 seasons ago. And with a healthy group, and that's considering the fact 2019, they didn't have the healthy stuff onto it, but Javon Hargrave was still there and they had Tyson Alualu. They had 2 guys to fill the middle and fill that other defensive end spot. They didn't have that this year. They had a myriad of guys. Now, granted, they eventually found Montravius Adams, who I love, by the way. You know, I'm a Montravius Adams guy. And Chris Wormley eventually stepped into the role. And I said by the end of the season, he was doing better than Yeoman's work. But if you can get a full season of that kind of production and competency, as opposed to the last couple games of a season, a full season of that makes you look a lot better, not only against the run, but also as a defense as a whole, because you're going to be even better in the red zone, even though you were 9th this past season, or I should say 5th this past season in the red zone. You're going to be even better on 3rd down, even though you were 9th on 3rd down this season. Now you look at more like an even more competent unit, and you look more like you did 3 seasons ago when you were 5th in the league in yards and 5th in the league in points allowed.
Absolutely. Josh, we could keep doing this all day, but I am way over time, and I need to let you get to dinner. I need to let myself get on to this Pitt basketball game I got to cover. But thanks so much for joining us, Josh. You are a wealth of information. We can't stop learning things when we have you on the show. Please let me know we can find you, follow you, and get more of that information by seeing your work.
Josh Taylor HD, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You go there, you got me.
Absolutely, do check him out at Josh Taylor HD. He is phenomenal. He gives great takes. He's on KDK TV. They need to get you back more on 93.7 The Fan, man, because you're awesome there. We love having you here though on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We look forward to the next time you'll be here. I'm your host, Chris Carter. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can find this show, the Locked On Steelers podcast, on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and of course YouTube. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the like button on this video if you enjoyed it. Share it with your friends. Share it with everybody. We hope that you are enjoying the show, and if you are enjoying the show, help us out. Give us a 5-star review with a positive comment on Apple Podcasts. We do both at the same time. You get a shout at the end of the show. That's all we have for you today. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll have Jenna Harnick wrapping up the week as usual on our Friday episodes of the Locked On Steelers podcast.